Maya thought she was just helping a struggling customer pay his bill, never knowing he was the billionaire CEO testing his own employees. What happens next will restore your faith in human kindness and reveal a secret that transforms everything she believed about second chances. A story that proves true character shines brightest in darkness and will leave you believing that one act of compassion can rewrite an entire destiny. The fluorescent lights of Danny's diner buzzed like angry wasps overhead, casting their harsh white glare across the cracked linoleum floor that had seen better decades. Maya Rodriguez moved between the tables with practiced efficiency, her worn sneakers making soft squeaking sounds against the black and white checkered pattern that had probably been stylish sometime in the 1970s. At 28, she carried herself with the weary grace of someone who had learned to smile through disappointment, to find small moments of joy in work that barely paid the bills. The autumn rain pelted against the large windows that faced the busy Chicago street, creating rivulets that distorted the view of hurrying pedestrians and honking traffic. Inside the diner, the warmth was artificial but welcome, scented with the perpetual aroma of coffee, bacon grease, and the faint staleness that clung to any establishment that never quite closed, never quite stopped, serving the endless stream of humanity that flowed through its doors. Maya tucked a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, the small diamond stud earring, her grandmother's last gift, catching the harsh light. It was a tiny thing, barely visible, but it represented everything she held dear: family, love, the belief that beauty could exist even in the most humble circumstances. Her grandmother, Elena Rodriguez, had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when Maya was 12. Elena had cleaned office buildings at night and taken care of other people's children during the day, but she had always insisted that Maya could be anything she wanted to be. "Education is the one thing they can never take away from you, mija," Elena used to say, her calloused hands gentle as she helped Maya with homework at their tiny kitchen table. But character, that's something you give yourself every single day with every choice you make. Maya had believed those words with the fierce faith of childhood. She had studied hard, earned scholarships, graduated summa cum laude with a degree in marketing and communications. For 3 wonderful years, she had worked at Henderson & Associates, a boutique marketing firm where she had felt like she was building something meaningful, creating campaigns that connected businesses with their communities. She had her own small office, a steady salary, benefits that made her feel secure for the first time since her grandmother's death. Then the recession hit like a freight train. Nobody saw coming. Restructuring, they called it, right-sizing, optimizing human resources, corporate euphemisms for the simple, brutal truth. They had found someone younger, cheaper, more desperate. Maya's position was eliminated on a Tuesday in March, along with 6 other employees who had thought they were safe, who had believed that hard work and dedication meant job security in the modern economy. That had been 8 months ago, 8 months of sending out resumes that disappeared into the digital void like messages in bottles thrown into an endless ocean. 8 months of interviews where she was either overqualified or underqualified, too expensive or too inexperienced, the wrong fit for reasons that were never quite explained but always felt personal. 8 months of watching her savings disappear like water through a sieve, of moving from her beloved studio apartment with the view of Lincoln Park to sharing a cramped 2-bedroom with Jessica, nursing student who worked double shifts and survived on ramen noodles and determination. The irony wasn't lost on Maya that she now worked in the service industry she had once created marketing campaigns for. She had written copy about exceeding customer expectations and delivering exceptional experiences, never truly understanding what it meant to be on the other side of that equation, to smile at people who treated you as if you were invisible, to depend on their generosity for your basic survival, to have your livelihood determined by the whims and moods of strangers who saw you as a function rather than a person. "Table 6 needs more coffee and they're getting impatient," barked Frank Morrison, the perpetually irritated manager whose expanding gut strained against his stained white shirt. Frank was 50-something. With thinning hair he combed over his scalp in careful strands that fooled no one, and a perpetual scowl that suggested the world had disappointed him in fundamental ways. He had been managing Danny's diner for 12 years, and in that time he had perfected the art of making everyone around him feel as miserable as he apparently felt himself. Maya nodded without speaking, grabbing the coffee pot from the warmer where it had been sitting too long, turning the coffee bitter and acrid. She had learned not to argue with Frank, not to point out when customers were being unreasonable, not to suggest improvements that might make the diner run more efficiently or create a more pleasant atmosphere for everyone involved. Frank ruled his small domain like a petty tyrant, and Maya needed this job too much to risk his displeasure over principles. The early morning rush was tapering off, leaving behind the usual collection of regulars who treated the diner like their personal office, their social club, their refuge from lives that had somehow become smaller than they had once imagined. There was Harold, a retired postal worker who ordered the same thing every day. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast no butter, coffee black as night, and read 3 different newspapers cover to cover while making a single cup of coffee last 2 hours. There was Mrs. Patterson, a widow in her 70s who nursed a single cup of tea with honey while working crossword puzzles and criticizing everything from the music to the temperature to the way Maya arranged the sugar packets on each table. At table 4 sat a group of construction workers, their clothes dusty with plaster and paint, their steel-toed boots muddy from whatever job site they had left to grab breakfast. Their conversations were punctuated by bursts of genuine laughter that felt like a gift in the often grim atmosphere of the diner, and they were good tippers, these men who worked with their hands and understood what it meant to earn money through sweat and effort. They treated Maya with respect, called her Miss, and Ma'am asked about her day as if her answer actually mattered to them. The morning crowd was predictable in its rhythms, as regular as clockwork, in a world that often felt chaotic and unpredictable. The commuters who grabbed coffee to go, barely making eye contact, already mentally at their offices or on their phones conducting the business that seemed to consume their every waking moment. The retirees who lingered over breakfast, savoring both the food and the human contact that might be their primary social interaction of the day. The shift workers heading home after long nights, their faces marked by fatigue but softened by the relief of another day completed, another paycheck earned. Maya moved through these patterns with practiced ease, refilling coffee cups before they emptied, remembering how each customer liked their eggs, their coffee, their small preferences that made them feel seen and cared for in a world that increasingly treated people like interchangeable parts in a vast machine. It wasn't the career she had planned, but she had learned to find dignity in the work, purpose in the small kindnesses she could offer, meaning in the brief moments of human connection that occasionally broke through the routine of service and transaction. That's when he walked in, and everything changed forever. The man who would transform Maya's life was utterly unremarkable at first glance, the kind of person who could disappear into a crowd without leaving an impression. Perhaps 45 years old, with salt and pepper hair that looked like it hadn't seen a professional stylist in months, maybe years. He wore a wrinkled button-down shirt in a shade of blue that had faded from too many washings, khaki pants that had seen better days, and shoes that were clean but clearly worn, the leather cracked and scuffed in ways that spoke of careful maintenance of items that couldn't be easily replaced. His jacket hung loosely on. His frame, suggesting recent weight loss or simply the kind of careful budgeting that meant buying clothes a size too large so they would last longer. There was something in his posture, slightly hunched as if he were carrying an invisible weight, that made him blend into the background, made him seem smaller and more vulnerable than his actual physical presence might suggest. He chose the corner booth, the one with the red vinyl seat that was cracked and patched with silver duct tape, the table that wobbled slightly no matter how many matchbooks Frank shoved under its legs. It was where people sat when they wanted to be left alone, when they were counting their money or nursing their problems, or simply trying to disappear for a while from a world that demanded more than they felt able to give. Maya approached him with the smile she had perfected over these 8 months, bright enough to seem genuine, professional enough to maintain appropriate boundaries, warm enough to make people feel welcome in a place that often felt more utilitarian than hospitable. It was a smile that cost her something every time she deployed it, a performance of cheerfulness that helped her get through days that might otherwise overwhelm her with their repetitive tedium. "Good morning. What can I get started for you today?" she said, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who had asked this question thousands of times. He looked up, and Maya was struck by his eyes. They were intelligent, kind, but shadowed with a deep sadness that she recognized because she had seen it in her own mirror during the darkest days after losing her job. It was the look of someone who had lost something precious, something irreplaceable, and was still trying to figure out how to exist in a world that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. "Just coffee, please," he said, his voice carrying a slight rasp, as if he hadn't used it much recently, as if he had grown, unaccustomed to being heard. "Black." Maya set down a menu, its laminated surface scarred by years of use, stained with coffee rings and marked with the small wounds that accumulated when something was handled by thousands of people over countless transactions. "Are you sure? Our pancakes are pretty famous around here. The cook makes them from scratch every morning. None of that mixed stuff." The man managed a tired smile, and Maya caught a glimpse of the person he might have been under. Different circumstances, when life was kinder and hope came more easily. "Thank you, that's very kind of you to say. But coffee's fine for now. Budget's a little tight this week." There was something in the way he said it, not embarrassed exactly, but resigned, as if he had gotten used to making these kinds of calculations. These small compromises that added up to a life lived on the margins, that made Maya's chest tighten with recognition. She had heard that tone in her own voice too, many times lately, at the grocery store when she put back items she wanted but couldn't afford, at the gas station when she counted out exact change, anywhere that required her to choose between necessities and small luxuries that might make life a little more bearable. "Coming right up," she said, and meant it with more warmth than usual, as she poured his coffee from the pot that had been sitting too long on the burner, turning the liquid bitter and harsh. Maya studied him, discreetly. His hands were clean but showed the calluses and small scars of someone who had done physical work, who had used his body to earn his living. His fingernails were trimmed and neat. His posture suggested education, or at least familiarity with professional environments, but his clothes told a different story. They were pressed. Someone had taken care to iron that shirt, but they were also worn in ways that suggested a careful stretching of resources, a wardrobe maintained, through necessity rather than choice. Maya had learned to read these signs during her months at Danny's Diner, had developed an almost supernatural ability to assess customers' financial situations and tipping potential within seconds of their arrival. The businessman in the expensive suit who left $5 on a $40 check because he was teaching her about efficiency. The college students who split a single meal 4 ways and left spare change scraped together from the bottoms of backpacks and purses. The elderly woman who ordered only coffee and then carefully counted out exact change from a coin purse that held what might be her monthly survival budget. This man was different. There was dignity in his careful politeness, respect in the way he said please and thank you, as if he genuinely meant both words, as if good manners were a choice he made regardless of his circumstances. He reminded her of her father, the way she remembered him from her childhood before the accident. Quiet strength, gentle manners, the kind of person who would give you his jacket if you were cold without making a big show of his generosity. "Maya!" Frank's voice cut through her observations like a rusty blade dragged across metal. "Stop daydreaming and get back to work. We're not paying you to make friends with every sad case that wanders in here." Heat flushed Maya's cheeks at the public humiliation, but she had learned not to respond to Frank's cruelties, had trained herself to absorb his small violations of her dignity without giving him the satisfaction of seeing her react. Instead, she set the coffee cup down carefully in front of the man, noting how he wrapped his hands around it as if drawing warmth from the ceramic, as if this simple pleasure was something to be savored rather than consumed quickly and forgotten. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said softly, her voice carrying a gentleness that was genuine, rather than professional. "Thank you," he replied, and something in his tone suggested he was thanking her for more than just the coffee, for the moment of human kindness in what might otherwise be a difficult day. The morning progressed with its usual mixture of small dramas and mundane tasks that filled Maya's hours with a steady rhythm of activity that kept her from dwelling too much on the gap between her current reality and her abandoned dreams. Mrs. Patterson complained that her eggs were too runny, then complained they were too hard after Maya had them remade in the kitchen, as if the act of complaint itself was more important than the resolution of any actual problem. A group of college students attempted to split a single meal 5 ways and left a crumpled dollar bill on a $20 check, as if their youthful poverty excused their thoughtlessness towards someone who was working to pay for the very education they were receiving. A businessman in a $1,000 suit snapped his fingers at Maya like she was a trained animal, then acted offended when she didn't immediately sprint to his table with the urgency his self-importance demanded. Through it all, the man in the corner booth sat quietly, making his single cup of coffee last through the entire morning rush, occasionally writing in a small notebook that he pulled from his jacket pocket. Maya found herself checking on him more frequently than necessary, topping off his cup, without being asked, drawn by something she couldn't quite identify. Perhaps the peace that seemed to radiate from his corner of the diner, the sense that here was someone who understood the value of small moments of refuge in a harsh world. Around 11 o'clock, when the breakfast crowd had thinned and the lunch preparations were beginning to create new chaos in the kitchen, he ordered a piece of apple pie. Maya watched him eat it slowly, cutting small bites and chewing thoughtfully, savoring each morsel in a way that suggested it might be a rare indulgence, something special rather than routine. He ate like someone who had learned not to take simple pleasures for granted, who understood that small luxuries, a piece of pie, a cup of coffee, a few hours of peace in a warm place, were gifts to be appreciated rather than consumed mindlessly. "Is everything okay with your pie?" Maya asked during one of her check-ins, genuinely curious about his satisfaction rather than just performing the required customer service ritual. "It's perfect," he said, and the genuine gratitude in his voice made her smile, despite the exhaustion that seemed to live in her bones these days, the weariness that came from working hard at something that felt temporary while dreaming of something that felt increasingly impossible. "Thank you for asking, and thank you for the extra coffee." "You didn't have to do that." "Of course I did," she replied without thinking. "We all need a little sweetness sometimes, right? A little extra kindness when the world feels too hard." He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if he were seeing something in her face that surprised him, something that didn't fit his expectations of how this interaction was supposed to proceed. "Yes," he said quietly, his voice carrying a weight of understanding that suggested he knew exactly what she meant. "We do." The lunch crowd began filtering in around noon, office workers on their break-clutching phones and conducting business between bites, mothers with strollers and diaper bags, juggling the complex logistics of feeding both themselves and their children, teenagers playing hooky from school and trying to look older than their years. The diner filled with the usual symphony of clinking silverware, overlapping conversations, and the constant hiss of the grill as orders piled up in the kitchen, and the pace of everything accelerated toward the controlled chaos of the midday rush. Maya moved through this familiar dance with practiced efficiency, taking orders while calculating tips, delivering plates while avoiding collision with her co-workers, mediating minor disputes between customers and kitchen staff, while maintaining the smile that was as much a part of her uniform as the stained apron she tied around her waist each morning. She had developed a rhythm over these months, a choreography of service that allowed her to stay busy enough that the time passed without dragging, engaged enough that she could take pride in her work, even when the work itself felt temporary, transitional, a placeholder for the life she was still trying to build. The man in the corner booth remained throughout the lunch rush, nursing his pie and coffee with the patience of someone who had nowhere urgent to be, no pressing appointments or obligations that required his immediate attention. Maya noticed that he had continued writing in his small notebook occasionally, not furiously like someone working against a deadline, but thoughtfully as if he were recording observations or working through problems in his mind, using the act of writing to process experiences or emotions that couldn't be easily spoken aloud. It was around 2 o'clock when the lunch crowd was beginning to thin and the afternoon lull was settling over the diner like a comfortable blanket, that Frank decided to make his move. Maya was clearing table 4, stacking plates with the mechanical efficiency that came from months of repetition. When she heard Frank's voice raised in the particular tone that meant trouble, the voice he used when he wanted to assert his authority over someone he perceived as powerless to fight back. She looked up to see him standing beside the corner booth, his arms crossed over his chest, his considerable bulk casting a shadow over the quiet man who had been nothing but polite and unobtrusive throughout his long stay. Frank's face wore the expression of barely contained irritation that his customers had learned to dread, the look of someone who took personal pleasure in making others uncomfortable. "Sir," Frank was saying, his voice loud enough to carry across the half-empty diner and draw the attention of other customers, "I'm going to need you to either order something substantial or move along. This isn't a library, and we're running a business here." The man looked up from his notebook, and Maya saw something flash in his eyes. Not anger exactly, but a deep hurt. The look of someone who had been kicked when he was already down, who had been trying to maintain his dignity in difficult circumstances, only to have it stripped away by someone who enjoyed exercising petty power over the vulnerable. "I understand," he said quietly, closing the notebook with careful movements that spoke of someone trying to maintain control over emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. "I'll just finish my coffee and go." But Frank wasn't finished. Maya could see it in his posture, in the way he was relishing having someone he could push around without consequences, someone who wouldn't fight back or complain to corporate or make his life difficult in any meaningful way. This was Frank at his worst, taking out his own frustrations and disappointments on someone who couldn't defend himself. "Look, buddy," Frank continued, his voice carrying across the diner and drawing uncomfortable glances from other customers who were beginning to realize they were witnessing something unpleasant. "I don't know what kind of establishment you think this is, but we're running a business here, paying customers only. We can't have people camping out all day over a cup of coffee and a piece of pie." Maya felt her stomach clench with familiar dread and growing anger. She had seen Frank humiliate people before, usually those he perceived as weak or different or unable to fight back. An elderly man who had been short $1 on his check and had been made to empty his pockets in front of other customers. A young mother whose toddler had been crying and who had been lectured about controlling your children in public spaces. A teenage girl who had been studying for hours over a single soda and had been told that this isn't a homework center for kids who can't afford to study at home. Frank seemed to take a perverse pleasure in these moments, as if asserting his small authority over vulnerable people made him feel bigger, more important, more powerful, in a life where he otherwise had very little control over anything that mattered. "He is a paying customer," Maya found herself saying, the words emerging before she had consciously decided to speak, driven by an anger that had been building for months as she watched Frank's casual cruelties. She moved toward the booth, her heart beginning to race with the familiar adrenaline of confrontation, knowing that what she was about to do was professionally dangerous but morally necessary. He ordered pie and has been drinking coffee for hours. He's been polite, he's been quiet, and he's been paying for everything he's consumed. Frank's face began to redden with the particular shade that his employees had learned to fear, the color that meant someone was about to be subjected to the full force of his displaced anger and professional insecurity. "Maya, mind your own business," he snapped, his voice rising another notch and ensuring that everyone in the diner was now watching their confrontation unfold. "This doesn't concern you, and I don't need input from staff about how to handle customer situations." But it did concern her. Something about this man's quiet dignity, his careful politeness, his obvious effort to maintain his self-respect despite what were clearly difficult circumstances, reminded her of too many people she had loved and lost. Her father, who had worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat after her mother got sick and the medical bills started piling up. Her grandmother, who had cleaned other people's messes for 30 years but never let anyone treat her as if she were less than human, who had maintained her pride and her principles even when both were costly luxuries she could barely afford. "Frank," Maya said, keeping her voice calm and professional despite the anger building in her, chest like steam in a pressure cooker. "He's not bothering anyone. He's been polite, he's been quiet, and he's been paying for what he orders. There's no reason to embarrass him like this." "There's every reason," Frank snapped, his voice rising another notch and taking on the aggressive edge that meant he was about to say something truly cruel. "Look at him. Look at this place. This is a respectable establishment, not some homeless shelter where people can camp out all day over a cup of coffee because they have nowhere else to go." The words hung in the air like a physical slap, cruel and unnecessary, and designed to wound. Maya saw the man's shoulders tense, saw him reach for his wallet with hands that trembled slightly, whether from anger, humiliation, or simply the caffeine from too much coffee. She couldn't tell. Around the diner, other customers were beginning to shift uncomfortably, some looking away as if they could avoid complicity in the scene by refusing to witness it. Others watching with the morbid fascination that people reserved for public spectacles of suffering. What happened next would later seem to Maya like something outside of her control, as if her body moved independently of her rational mind, guided by instincts and values that ran deeper than common sense or self-preservation or any calculation of personal cost. As the man fumbled for his money, clearly flustered and embarrassed by the public nature of his humiliation, his wallet slipped from his fingers and fell to the floor with a soft thud that seemed unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet diner. The contents scattered across the worn linoleum, a few crumpled bills that suggested careful budgeting, some loose change that spoke of someone counting every penny, a credit card that might or might not still work, and a photograph that looked like it had been handled so many times that the edges were soft and worn, like a prayer card or a talisman, carried for comfort and hope. Maya didn't think. She simply knelt down beside the booth to help him gather his belongings, driven by an instinct for kindness that was stronger than any concern for her own professional safety or Frank's inevitable anger. It was what her grandmother would have done, what her parents had taught her to do before their deaths had forced her to learn harder lessons about survival and compromise. The photograph caught her eye as she reached for it. A young woman in a cap and gown, her face radiant with the particular joy that came with major accomplishments. With dreams realized and futures full of possibility, the graduation photo was clearly precious to him, carried everywhere, looked at often, handled with the reverence reserved for sacred objects. His daughter Maya realized with a sudden tightness in her throat that made it hard to breathe. "That's a beautiful picture," she said softly as she handed it back to him, noting how his fingers trembled as he took it from her, how carefully he held it as if it were made of something more fragile than photographic paper. "My daughter Emma," he said, his voice thick with an emotion that made Maya's heart ache with recognition and sympathy. She just graduated from nursing school, Northwestern, top of her class. His voice broke slightly, and Maya saw tears gathering in his eyes that he was too proud to let fall. "I'm so proud of her. So proud of the person she's become, the work she's chosen to do." In that moment, Maya saw everything with perfect clarity, as if a fog had suddenly lifted and revealed the true landscape of the situation. This wasn't just a man down on his luck, someone who had fallen through society's cracks and landed in a diner booth where he was unwelcome and unwanted. This was a father, someone who had raised a daughter, supported her dreams, celebrated her achievements, carried her picture like a reminder of love and purpose and hope in a world that could be cruel and indifferent. Maybe he was between jobs, maybe he was dealing with medical bills or divorce costs, or any of the countless financial catastrophes that could derail a middle-class life. Maybe he was struggling with depression or grief or some other invisible burden that made simple tasks like finding work or maintaining appearances feel overwhelmingly difficult. It didn't matter. What mattered was that he was human, that he had dignity and worth and feelings, and that no one deserved to be humiliated for the crime of existing in a public space while poor, while struggling, while imperfectly navigating the complex demands of modern life. "Your meal today is on me," Maya said, standing up and reaching for her own wallet in her apron pocket, pulling out the $20 bill she had been saving for groceries, money she couldn't really afford to spend on a stranger but couldn't afford not to spend if she wanted to live with herself. "Maya, what the hell do you think you're doing?" Frank's voice had reached a volume that ensured everyone in the diner was now watching their little drama, waiting to see how it would resolve, whether kindness or cruelty would triumph in this small corner of the world. Maya ignored him, placing the 20 on the table with hands that were steadier than she felt inside. "It's not charity," she told the man gently, looking directly into his eyes so he would know she meant every word. "It's just one person helping another. We all need that sometimes, and there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered with genuine care." The man's eyes filled with tears he was clearly too proud to shed, his voice barely above a whisper when he spoke. "I can't let you do that. You don't know me, you don't owe me anything, and you probably need that money yourself." "You're not letting me do anything," Maya replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice, by the certainty she felt about this choice, even as she understood its potential consequences. "I'm choosing to do it. There's a difference. This is my choice, my decision, and it's based on my belief that we're all connected, that kindness matters, that treating each other with dignity and respect isn't just nice but necessary." Around them, the diner had fallen silent, except for the eternal buzz of the fluorescent lights and the soft sizzle of something cooking in the kitchen. Maya could feel every eye in the place focused on their corner booth, could sense the mixture of emotions radiating from the other customers: surprise, approval, disapproval, curiosity, discomfort, admiration. She had become the center of a moral drama that everyone present would remember and discuss for days, maybe years. Frank's face had progressed from red to an alarming shade of purple, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that was somehow more threatening than his earlier shouting. "Maya Rodriguez," he said, each word carefully enunciated like bullets being loaded into a gun, "you are way out of line here. This is not your money to throw around, and this is not how we run this establishment. You do not have the authority to make these kinds of decisions about customer service or company policy." "Then maybe we're running it wrong," Maya heard herself say, the words escaping before her better judgment could stop them, before she could calculate the cost of speaking this particular truth in this particular moment. "Maybe there's something wrong with a system that punishes kindness and rewards cruelty, that treats human dignity as a luxury we can't afford rather than a basic requirement of decent society." The silence that followed was deafening, charged with tension and possibility. Frank stepped closer, his bulk casting a shadow over the booth, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who held her livelihood in his hands, and was prepared to use that power without hesitation or remorse. "Get your things," he said slowly, each word carefully enunciated so there could be no misunderstanding, no possibility that this was a threat rather than a statement of fact. "You're fired. Clean out your locker, turn in your apron, and don't come back ever." The words hit Maya like a physical blow, but as she looked at the man in the booth, at his grateful eyes, at the photograph of his daughter still clutched in his trembling hands, at the dignity he had managed to maintain despite Frank's attempts to strip it away, she realized she didn't regret what she had done. 28 years old, no job, rent due in 2 weeks, and she had just thrown away her only source of income for a principle, for the belief that human dignity was more important than keeping quiet and keeping her head down and preserving the status quo that benefited people like Frank while grinding down everyone else. Her grandmother, Elena, would have been proud of her values and worried sick about her judgment in equal measure. "It's okay," Maya told the man as he started to stand, probably to intervene on her behalf, to try to undo the damage his presence had caused to her life. "Really, stay and enjoy your meal. You deserve to eat in peace, to be treated with respect, to exist in public spaces without having to justify your presence to anyone." She untied her apron with hands that were steadier than she felt, inside her heart pounding but her conscience clear. This was the right thing to do, regardless of the personal cost. This was the person she wanted to be, the person her grandmother had raised her to be. Someone who stood up for others, even when it was inconvenient or expensive or professionally dangerous. Around the diner, the other customers watched in fascination and horror as the drama reached its conclusion. The businessman in the expensive suit shook his head disapprovingly, probably thinking about the importance of maintaining professional boundaries and not getting emotionally involved with customers. Mrs. Patterson actually smiled and nodded approvingly, her crossword puzzle forgotten for once as she witnessed something that restored her faith in human nature. The construction workers at table 4 looked angry on Maya's behalf, and she heard one of them mutter something about, "That's not right, treating people like that," as she walked past them toward the employee break room to collect her few personal belongings. In the tiny space that served as Danny's Diner's employee area, a folding table held together with duct tape, two plastic chairs that had seen better decades, a broken refrigerator that no one had bothered to fix, Maya sat down and allowed herself to feel the full impact of what had just happened. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a mixture of pride and terror that made her hands shake as she gathered her few personal items from the dented locker that had held the small tokens of her working life. She was unemployed. Again. And this time, she had done it to herself, had chosen principles over pragmatism in a world that rarely rewarded such choices. Jessica would be supportive but worried. Her friends would call her both admirable and foolish, and her landlord would expect rent regardless of the moral correctness of her unemployed state. Her phone, charging on the folding table among the accumulated debris of break room life, buzzed with a text from Jessica. "How's work going? Still on for dinner tonight? I'm making spaghetti, and we can work on your resume if you want to keep looking for something better." Maya stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How did you tell your roommate that you had just destroyed your own life for a principle, that you had chosen compassion over common sense, human dignity over financial security, that you were now unemployed, not because of corporate downsizing or market forces beyond your control, but because you couldn't stand to watch a vulnerable person be humiliated by someone with petty power? Before she could figure out what to say, her phone rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number, and normally Maya would have let it go to voicemail. Too many bill collectors, too many automated messages about car warranties and vacation packages she couldn't afford, too many scams targeting people who were desperate enough to answer unknown numbers in the hope they might represent opportunity rather than harassment. But something made her answer, some instinct that this call might be different, might be important in ways she couldn't anticipate. "Hello, is this Maya Rodriguez?" The voice was crisp, professional, distinctly feminine, with the kind of confidence that came from working in environments where competence was assumed and excellence was expected. "Yes, this is Maya. This is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh Communications. I have your resume here in our files, and I'd like to discuss a position we have available. Would you be able to come in for an interview tomorrow morning?" Maya's heart stopped, then began racing at a pace that made her dizzy. Walsh Communications. She knew the name. Everyone in Chicago's business community knew the name. It was one of the most prestigious public relations firms in the city, the kind of place that handled major corporate accounts and political campaigns, the kind of company she had dreamed of working for, but never thought she'd have a realistic shot at joining. She had sent them her resume 6 months ago, back when she had still been optimistic about finding something in her field, when she had still believed that her education and experience would eventually lead to meaningful work in an industry she understood and enjoyed. She had never heard back and had assumed her application had disappeared into the digital void along with hundreds of others, lost in the algorithmic black hole that seemed to consume job applications from qualified but not exceptional candidates. Yes, absolutely," Maya managed, trying to keep the shock and desperation out of her voice. "What time would work best for you? How's 10 o'clock? Our offices are downtown on Michigan Avenue. I'll email you the details within the hour, including information about the position and what we'd like you to prepare for the discussion." After hanging up, Maya sat in the break room staring at her phone in disbelief, trying to process the cosmic timing of what had just occurred. The synchronicity felt surreal, almost mystical. She had just lost her job for doing what she believed was right, and immediately, within minutes, an opportunity had appeared from nowhere, as if the universe had been waiting for her to prove her character before offering her a chance at the career she had always wanted. Maybe Eleanor had been right about doing the right thing and letting the universe sort out the details. Maybe there was some kind of moral accounting system that rewarded courage and compassion, even when such qualities came at significant personal cost. Maya gathered her belongings, a spare change of clothes she kept for emergencies, some personal items from her small locker, the paperback novel she read during breaks when the diner was quiet enough to allow for such luxuries. As she prepared to walk back through the diner for what she assumed would be the last time, she could hear voices from the dining area, animated conversation that hadn't been there before her dramatic exit. She pushed through the swinging door and was surprised to find the atmosphere completely transformed. Instead of the usual afternoon lethargy that settled over the place like dust, the diner buzzed with energy and excitement. Customers were talking to each other across tables, animated discussions about what they had just witnessed, as if her confrontation with Frank had broken down the invisible barriers that usually kept strangers from acknowledging each other's humanity. The man in the corner booth was no longer alone. Several of the construction workers had moved to sit near him, and Mrs. Patterson had abandoned her usual table to join what appeared to be an impromptu support group for people who had witnessed something that challenged their assumptions about human nature and corporate power. "There she is," called out one of the construction workers as Maya appeared, his voice carrying genuine admiration and approval. "That was a hell of a thing you did, miss. Takes guts to stand up to a bully like that, especially when it's your boss." "Frank's locked himself in his office," Mrs. Patterson informed her with obvious satisfaction, her usual sharp demeanor replaced by something approaching warmth. "Won't come out. Probably calling the district manager to cover his behind and figure out how to spin what just happened here." Maya looked toward the corner booth, where the man she had helped was surrounded by new friends, all of them talking and laughing in a way that suggested the bonds formed by shared outrage against injustice, by witnessing someone choose moral courage over personal safety. He caught her eye and raised his coffee cup in a small salute, his face transformed by the first genuine smile she had seen from him since he had walked through the door hours earlier. "Thank you," he called out, his voice carrying across the diner with a strength and clarity that hadn't been there before, as if her act of kindness had somehow restored something essential that Frank's cruelty had tried to steal. "For reminding me that there are still good people in this world, that decency and compassion haven't been completely eliminated by economic pressure and corporate indifference." Maya felt her eyes fill with tears, but they were good tears, the kind that came from knowing you had done something right even when it cost you everything, from being reminded that individual choices could create ripples of positive change that extended far beyond your ability to see or measure. She walked toward the door, aware that every person in the diner was watching her, but no longer caring about the spectacle or the attention. As she pushed through the glass door into the cool afternoon air, she heard a burst of spontaneous applause behind her, the sound following her onto the sidewalk like a blessing. Outside, the autumn sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting everything in a golden light that made even the busy Chicago street look hopeful and full of possibility. Maya walked to the bus stop, her mind racing between anxiety about her immediate financial future and excitement about the interview tomorrow that could change everything. As she waited for the bus that would take her home to figure out how to explain to Jessica what had happened and why, a black sedan pulled up to the curb with the quiet efficiency of expensive machinery. The passenger window rolled down with a soft electric hum, and Maya was surprised to see the man from the diner sitting inside, no longer alone, but accompanied by a driver whose professional demeanor suggested this was not a casual arrangement. "Maya," the man called out, and there was something different about his voice now, a quality of authority and confidence that hadn't been evident during his hours of quiet suffering in the corner booth. She approached the car cautiously, unsure what to expect, but curious about this unexpected development. "Yes, I wanted to thank you again for what you did back there," he said, his words carrying a weight of genuine gratitude that made her chest tight with emotion. "And I wanted to give you this." He held out a thick envelope that looked official and important, the kind of correspondence that usually contained either very good news or very bad news. "That's really not necessary," Maya protested, uncomfortable with the idea of being rewarded for doing what any decent person should do in similar circumstances. "I didn't help you because I expected something in return. I helped you because it was the right thing to do." "Please," he insisted, and there was something in his tone, a quiet authority she hadn't noticed before, an undertone of command, that suggested he was accustomed to having his requests honored. That made her accept the envelope, despite her instinctive reluctance. "It would mean a great deal to me if you would take it. More than you know." Before she could ask any questions about who he really was, or why this gesture felt so important to him, the sedan pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the afternoon traffic, leaving Maya standing at the bus stop with an envelope in her hands and a dozen new questions racing through her mind. On the bus ride home, swaying with the motion of the vehicle as it navigated the congested streets toward her neighborhood, Maya opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside, along with the $20 she had spent on his meal, money she desperately needed but had never expected to see again, was a business card that made her hands shake and her breath catch in her throat. David Chen, Chief Executive Officer, Chen Industries. Maya stared at the card, her mind reeling as she tried to process what she was seeing. Everyone in Chicago knew that name, knew the company and its reputation. Chen Industries owned over 300 restaurants across the Midwest, from family diners like Danny's to upscale establishments that charged more for a single meal than Maya made in a week. They were known throughout the industry for their progressive policies, their commitment to employee welfare, their reputation for treating workers fairly in a business notorious for exploitation and abuse. David Chen was something of a legend in the business world, a self-made billionaire who had started with a single restaurant inherited from his immigrant parents and built an empire while maintaining his principles and his connection to the communities his businesses served. He was famously reclusive, rarely appearing in public or giving interviews, but he was also known for his hands-on approach to business, his insistence on understanding every aspect of his operations from the ground up. And she had just bought his lunch, had defended him against the petty tyranny of a manager who worked for his own company, had been fired for treating the CEO of Chen Industries with basic human decency. There was also a handwritten note on expensive paper, written in careful script, that suggested either excellent penmanship training or the kind of deliberate care that came when words carried particular weight and importance. Thank you for seeing me as a human being when no one else did. Your kindness reminded me why I started this company in the first place and what values I want it to represent. I hope we can talk soon. David Chen. Maya read the note 3 times, each reading making the situation seem more surreal and impossible. David Chen, billionaire CEO, had been sitting in Danny's diner testing his own employees, conducting some kind of undercover evaluation of how his company's managers treated both customers and staff, and she had been fired for treating him with the basic respect and dignity that should have been automatic, regardless of his financial status or social position. The irony was so complete, it was almost funny, almost but not quite, because the personal cost was still very real and very immediate. Her phone rang again, jolting her from her stunned contemplation. This time it was Frank, and his voice was completely different from the authoritative bark she was used to hearing, replaced by something that sounded suspiciously like panic, barely held in check. "Maya," he said, and there was a tremor in his voice that she had never heard before. "I need you to come back in, right now. The district manager is here and she wants to talk to you immediately." "I think we covered everything earlier, Frank," Maya replied, surprised by her own calmness in the face of his obvious distress. "You fired me, remember, for showing basic human kindness to a customer who was being mistreated. Just, please," Frank begged, and the desperation in his voice was so complete that Maya almost felt sorry for him. "Come back. This is important. More important than you know." Maya looked out the bus window at the city passing by, at the people on the sidewalks going about their lives, each carrying their own invisible burdens and secret struggles. 20 minutes ago, she had been unemployed and desperate, facing an uncertain future, with nothing but her principles and a job interview that might or might not lead anywhere. Now she had that same interview, plus the personal attention of one of Chicago's most successful businessmen, and what appeared to be a developing situation at Danny's diner that might change everything. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, she said. When Maya walked back into Danny's diner half an hour later, the scene was completely different from the one she had left. Frank stood behind the counter looking like he had seen a ghost, his usual bluster and aggression replaced by nervous energy that made him fidget with everything he touched. The coffee pot, the order pads, the register keys that he pushed randomly as if the familiar motions might somehow restore his sense of control over a situation that had clearly spiraled far beyond his ability to manage. Beside him, stood a woman in an expensive suit that screamed corporate authority and professional competence, someone who clearly outranked Frank by several levels in the Chen Industries hierarchy. She was perhaps 45, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon and the kind of understated elegance that came from working in environments where appearance was part of the job description. And sitting in a booth near the counter, no longer dressed like a down-on-his-luck customer, but wearing a perfectly tailored business suit that probably cost more than Maya made in 6 months, was David Chen himself. The transformation was startling and complete. This was not the quiet, desperate man she had helped earlier, but one of the most powerful businessmen in the Midwest, someone whose decisions affected thousands of employees and millions of customers across multiple states. The diner was unusually full for late afternoon, with an eclectic mix of people who seemed to be watching the proceedings with intense interest. Some were clearly other corporate executives, their expensive clothes and confident bearing marking them as colleagues or subordinates of Chen's. Others looked like they might be journalists or business reporters, drawn by whatever story was unfolding in this unlikely location. Maya, the district manager, extended her hand with a smile that seemed genuine despite the corporate circumstances. "I'm Sarah Morrison, Regional Director for Chen Industries. I think we have quite a lot to talk about, and I want you to know that we're all very interested in hearing your perspective on what happened here today." Maya shook her hand, acutely aware that every eye in the diner was focused on their interaction, that she had somehow become the center of a drama whose scope and implications she was only beginning to understand. The afternoon customers had been replaced by this unusual audience, all of them watching to see how this story would resolve. "Mr. Chen has told us what happened here today," Sarah continued, her voice carrying easily through the suddenly quiet space, pitched to include everyone present in the conversation. "I want you to know that Frank's behavior was completely unacceptable and goes against everything our company stands for, everything we've tried to build over the past 20 years. Frank shifted uncomfortably, his face cycling through various shades of red and white as he realized the magnitude of what he had done, how completely he had misunderstood the situation and violated the values of the company that employed him. "Now, Sarah," he began, his voice carrying none of its earlier authority, "I was just trying to maintain standards, to keep undesirable elements from—" "You were humiliating a customer and then firing an employee for showing basic human decency." Sarah cut him off with the kind of quiet authority that made it clear who was really in charge, who held the power to make decisions that would affect careers and livelihoods. "That's not maintaining standards, Frank. That's failing them completely, and it's exactly the opposite of what we expect from our management staff." David Chen stood up, and Maya was struck by how completely he had been transformed by the change of clothes and context. Earlier, hunched in the corner booth with his worn clothes and defeated posture, he had seemed smaller, more vulnerable, almost invisible. Now he commanded the room with the kind of presence that came from years of making decisions that affected thousands of people, from building something significant and meaningful, from nothing but determination and vision. "Maya," he said, his voice carrying that same quiet gratitude she had heard in the car, but now amplified by the formal setting and the audience of witnesses, "I owe you an explanation for what happened here today, and I want everyone present to understand exactly what kind of person you are and what you've done." He paused, and Maya saw him take a deep breath before continuing, as if what he was about to say required particular courage or emotional effort. "What happened here today was part of our company's Undercover evaluation program," he explained, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had thought long and hard about the policies he was describing. "We regularly test our locations to see how employees treat customers, particularly those who might be viewed as less valuable, less deserving of basic respect and courtesy." Maya felt a complex mixture of emotions washing over her. Relief that she had somehow passed a test she hadn't known she was taking, pride that her instincts had been correct, but also a deep sadness that such tests were necessary in the first place, that businesses had to actively monitor their employees to ensure basic human decency. "Why do you do this?" she asked, genuinely curious about the philosophy behind such an unusual business practice. David's expression grew serious, and Maya caught a glimpse of the pain she had seen in his eyes earlier, the shadow that seemed to follow him even in his moments of professional triumph and public recognition. "Because," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experience and loss, of lessons learned through suffering rather than success, how a business treats its most vulnerable customers tells you everything you need to know about its character, its values, its likelihood of long-term success in building genuine community relationships. He paused, swallowing hard before continuing, and Maya realized that whatever he was about to share was deeply personal, something that went to the heart of who he was and why he had chosen to build his business in such an unusual way. 6 months ago, he continued, his voice becoming quieter, more intimate despite the public setting, my daughter Emma was killed by a drunk driver. She was 24 years old, a registered nurse who had just graduated from Northwestern University's nursing program. She was brilliant, compassionate, dedicated to helping people who couldn't help themselves. The diner fell completely silent, except for the eternal hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the street outside. Even Mrs. Patterson, who had remained to witness this extraordinary scene, had stopped working on her crossword puzzle and was listening with obvious emotion. Emma spent her last day volunteering at a homeless shelter on the south side, David continued, his voice growing stronger as he talked about his daughter's life rather than her death. She was helping people who had nowhere else to go, who had been written off by society, who were struggling with mental illness and addiction, and the thousand small catastrophes that can derail a human life. Maya felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to this powerful man talk about his daughter with such obvious love and pride, thinking about the photograph he had carried so carefully, the way his voice had changed when he talked about her graduation from nursing school. "The last text message Emma sent me," David said, pulling out his phone and reading from it with a voice that trembled slightly, "was about how important it was to treat every person with dignity, regardless of their circumstances or their ability to pay for services. She believed that how we treat the most vulnerable members of society is the true measure of our humanity, our worthiness as a civilization." He looked directly at Maya, and she saw in his eyes not just gratitude, but something deeper, recognition perhaps, of finding someone who embodied the values his daughter had died believing in. "I've been struggling since then," David admitted, his voice growing quieter again, more personal, questioning everything about how I've built my business, wondering if I've lost sight of what really matters in the pursuit of profit and growth. Today, Maya, you reminded me that Emma was right, that there are still people who understand that every human being deserves respect and kindness, regardless of their circumstances. Sarah Morrison stepped forward, pulling documents from her briefcase with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making important decisions quickly and decisively. "Frank," she said, her voice carrying the finality of corporate judgment, "you're relieved of your duties effective immediately. We'll be conducting a full investigation into your management practices at this location, and I suspect we're going to find a pattern of behavior that violates both company policy and basic human decency." Frank's face went through several color changes before settling on a pale gray that made him look genuinely ill. "You can't do this," he stammered, his voice weak and desperate. "I've been managing this place for 12 years. I know these customers. I know this business. I know how to run a profitable operation. You know how to humiliate vulnerable people and punish employees for showing compassion," Sarah replied coolly, her voice carrying the kind of controlled anger that was more effective than shouting. "That's not the kind of knowledge we value at Chen Industries, and it's not the kind of management style we want representing our company to the community." She turned to Maya with a smile that seemed genuinely warm despite the professional context and the formal circumstances. "Maya, I'd like to offer you Frank's position as manager of this location with a significant increase in salary and full benefits, including health insurance, dental coverage, and a retirement plan." Maya's mind reeled as she tried to process what she was hearing. Manager, here. But what about the interview at Walsh Communications scheduled for tomorrow morning? What about her dreams of getting back into marketing, of building the career she had always wanted, of using her education and experience in ways that felt meaningful and professionally fulfilling? As if he could read her thoughts and understand her hesitation, David Chen spoke again, his voice carrying a tone of excitement and possibility that hadn't been there before. "Actually, Sarah, I have a different proposal," he said, looking directly at Maya with an expression that combined business acumen with genuine human interest. "Maya, how would you feel about joining our corporate team? I want to create a new position specifically for you, Director of Customer Experience and Employee Relations." Maya stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing, unable to believe that her life could change so dramatically in the space of a few hours. "I don't understand," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You'd be working directly with me and the executive team," David explained, his enthusiasm growing as he described his vision, "to ensure that what happened here today never happens again at any of our locations. You'd be developing training programs, hiring policies, evaluation criteria, everything designed to create a culture where employees are empowered and rewarded for showing compassion, not punished for it." The scope of what he was offering began to sink in as Maya listened to him describe the position. Not just a job, but a chance to influence an entire company's approach to human relations, to create systems that would protect both customers and employees from the kind of abuse Frank had tried to inflict. "You'd be helping us build something that Emma would have been proud of," David continued, his voice growing softer, more personal again. "A company that measures success not just in profits and market share, but in the positive impact we have on people's lives, in the dignity and respect we show to everyone who interacts with our business." Maya looked around the diner, at the faces watching her with expressions of curiosity, admiration, and genuine interest in how she would respond to this unprecedented opportunity. The construction workers were grinning and nodding approvingly, clearly pleased to see kindness rewarded in such a dramatic fashion. Mrs. Patterson had tears in her eyes, probably thinking about all the times she had witnessed or experienced casual cruelty from people in positions of minor authority. "There's something else," David said, his voice taking on an even more serious tone. "I want to establish the Emma Chen Foundation, a non-profit organization that provides scholarships and emergency assistance to service workers who demonstrate exceptional character and kindness. I'd like you to help me run it, to help me create something that honors my daughter's memory, while providing real practical support to people who are struggling." The weight of what he was offering hit Maya like a physical force. Not just a corporate position with a good salary, but a mission that aligned perfectly with her values, with the lessons her grandmother had taught her about the importance of character and compassion. This was a chance to honor Emma Chen's memory while creating systemic change that could improve the lives of countless service workers who faced the kind of treatment Frank had tried to inflict on David. "Your daughter," Maya said softly, looking directly into David's eyes. "She sounds like she was an incredible person, someone who understood that individual choices matter, that how we treat each other defines who we are as human beings." David's eyes filled with tears he no longer tried to hide, his voice thick with emotion when he responded. "She was. She believed that the smallest acts of kindness could create ripples that spread far beyond what we could imagine or measure. I lost sight of that after she died, but you helped me remember it today." Maya felt the rightness of the moment settling around her, like a warm embrace, the sense that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. This was why her grandmother had always insisted that doing the right thing would somehow eventually lead to the right place. Not because the universe was fair, life had taught Maya that fairness was often in short supply, but because character attracted character, kindness drew kindness, and people who stood up for their principles eventually found themselves surrounded by others who shared those same values. "I'd be honored to help you honor Emma's memory," Maya said, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. "But I have one condition." David raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by what she might request given the extraordinary nature of what had already transpired. "What's that?" Maya looked at Frank, who was standing behind the counter, looking like his world had just collapsed around him, probably contemplating unemployment and professional disgrace after 12 years of what he had thought was successful management. She thought about his years of small cruelties, his pattern of taking out his own frustrations on people who couldn't fight back, his willingness to humiliate vulnerable customers for his own psychological satisfaction. But she also thought about Emma Chen, about a young woman who had spent her last day volunteering at a homeless shelter, helping people who society had written off as lost causes. She thought about the values that had gotten her into this situation in the first place, about the belief that everyone deserved dignity and respect, that people could change if they were given the right opportunities and support. "Frank gets a second chance too," she said firmly, her voice carrying across the diner and drawing surprised looks from everyone present. Not as a manager. Clearly he wasn't suited for that role and needs significant retraining, but maybe in another capacity within the company. Everyone deserves the opportunity to learn and grow, to become better than they were. Frank looked up in shock, his face cycling through disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been gratitude or hope. "Maya," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "after what I did to you, after how I treated you and that customer, I don't deserve anything from you. I don't deserve your kindness or your forgiveness." "Maybe not," Maya interrupted gently, looking at him with compassion rather than anger or judgment. "But Emma spent her last day at a homeless shelter, helping people who society had given up on, people who had made mistakes and poor choices, but still deserved care and support. I think she'd want us to believe in second chances, to believe that people can change if they're given the right motivation and support system." David Chen looked at Maya for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, a recognition perhaps that he had found not just an employee, but someone who truly understood what he was trying to build, what kind of legacy he wanted to create in his daughter's memory. "You know what, Maya?" he said, a smile slowly spreading across his face, the first truly joyful expression she had seen from him since their initial meeting in the corner booth. "I think you're exactly right. Frank, you'll be starting next Monday in our training department, working with new managers and seasoned employees to help them understand what not to do, how to recognize and correct the kind of behavior you displayed today." Frank's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to speak, his voice barely audible in the suddenly quiet diner. "Thank you," he whispered, the words carrying a weight of genuine remorse and gratitude that suggested he truly understood the magnitude of what he had done wrong and the generosity being shown to him. "Both of you, I promise I'll do better. I'll be better." Sarah Morrison stepped forward again, this time with contracts and benefit information, the practical documents that would formalize Maya's transformation from struggling waitress to corporate executive. "Maya, if you're willing to make this commitment, I'd like to make everything official right now. The position starts immediately, with a salary that I think you'll find more than competitive." Maya looked at the papers, contracts, benefit information, forms that would formalize her leap from poverty to middle-class security in a single signature. The salary figure made her dizzy. It was more than she had made in her previous marketing job, enough to pay off her student loans within a few years, to move out of Jessica's cramped apartment, to finally feel financially secure for the first time since her grandmother's death. But more than the money, it was the opportunity that took her breath away. The chance to build something meaningful, to create systems that would protect and empower service workers throughout the region, to ensure that no one else would be humiliated for showing basic human kindness to someone in need. "There's just one more thing," David said as Maya prepared to sign the documents that would change her life forever. "I know this is sudden and overwhelming, and you might have other commitments or opportunities you're considering. If you need time to think about it, to discuss it with family or friends." Maya thought about the interview at Walsh Communications scheduled for tomorrow morning, about the career path she had been so desperately trying to rebuild, about the dreams she had been chasing since losing her position at Henderson and Associates. Then she looked at David Chen, at this man who had been broken by loss and was now trying to rebuild something meaningful from the pieces, trying to honor his daughter's memory by creating positive change in the world. She thought about Emma Chen, about a young woman she had never met but whose values and beliefs had somehow reached across death to create this moment, this opportunity, this chance to make a difference in ways that would have been impossible to imagine just hours earlier. "No," Maya said firmly, her voice carrying absolute certainty despite the magnitude of the decision she was making. "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm meant to do." 3 months later, Maya sat in her new office on the 42nd floor of the Chen Industries building, looking out over Lake Michigan as the morning sun painted the water in shades of gold and silver that reminded her why she had fallen in love with Chicago in the first place. Her desk was mahogany, her chair was leather, and her view was spectacular. But what she treasured most were the photographs and documents that covered every available surface, telling the story of the work she and David had accomplished together in such a short time. There was a picture of her grandmother, Elena, taken at Maya's college graduation, her weathered face radiant with pride and hope for the future her granddaughter would build. There was the newspaper clipping about the Emma Chen Foundation's first scholarship recipients, 12 young people who would now be able to pursue their dreams of nursing school, teaching, social work, and other careers dedicated to helping others. There was a framed copy of the new employee handbook that Maya had helped write, establishing policies that protected workers' rights to show compassion without fear of retaliation. And there was a new photograph that David had given her just last week. Emma Chen at her nursing school pinning ceremony, surrounded by classmates and professors, looking toward a future that had been cut tragically short, but whose influence continued to grow through the foundation that bore her name. "She would have loved you," David had said when he gave her the photo, his voice still carrying the sadness of loss but now mixed with something else. Purpose, hope, the satisfaction of knowing that his daughter's values lived on through the work they were doing together. "You have the same spirit she did, the same belief that individual choices can change the world." Maya's work was challenging and rewarding in ways she had never expected. She spent her days developing policies that would ensure every Chen Industries employee was treated with dignity and respect, creating training programs that taught managers to see their workers as whole human beings rather than just pairs of hands, establishing evaluation criteria that measured success not just in sales figures and customer complaints, but in employee satisfaction and community impact. The results had been remarkable and swift. Employee turnover had dropped by 40% across all Chen Industries locations. Customer satisfaction scores had reached all-time highs. Most importantly, they were receiving regular reports of employees who felt empowered to go above and beyond for customers in need, knowing they would be supported rather than punished for showing compassion. The Emma Chen Foundation had grown beyond either of their wildest expectations. In just 3 months, they had received over 2,000 applications for assistance, stories of single mothers working multiple jobs to support their children while attending night school, older workers who had lost their jobs due to corporate downsizing and were struggling to find new opportunities, young people trying to pay for education while supporting family members who depended on their income. Each application represented a person, a story, a dream that might just need a little support to become reality. Maya read everyone personally, looking for the same qualities she had seen in David that day in the diner: dignity in difficult circumstances, kindness despite personal struggles, the quiet strength that came from refusing to give up hope even when circumstances seemed overwhelming. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Still can't believe my roommate is now a corporate executive. Want to grab dinner tonight and tell me about your latest foundation project?" Maya smiled and typed back, "Can't tonight. Board meeting until late. But this weekend for sure. I have amazing stories to share." The Emma Chen Foundation board meetings had become the highlight of Maya's week, gatherings that felt more like family meetings than corporate obligations. David chaired them with the same careful attention he brought to his business meetings, but there was a warmth and purpose in these discussions that made everyone involved feel like they were part of something larger than themselves. The board included David and Maya, along with Sarah Morrison and several other Chen Industries executives, but they had also recruited outside members who brought different perspectives and expertise. Dr. Patricia Williams was a retired social worker who had spent 40 years helping people navigate crisis situations and understood the complex challenges facing vulnerable populations. Michael Torres was a former restaurant worker who had built his own successful catering business and brought street-level knowledge of what service industry employees needed to thrive. Sister Margaret O'Brien ran a homeless shelter on the South Side and brought decades of experience working with society's most vulnerable populations. Her presence on the board ensured that the Foundation's work remained grounded in the realities of poverty and homelessness, rather than becoming an abstract exercise in corporate social responsibility. Together, they were building something unprecedented, a foundation that didn't just write checks, but created genuine opportunities for people to transform their lives. They funded education and job training, provided emergency assistance for medical bills and housing crises, created mentorship programs that paired successful professionals with service workers who wanted to advance their careers, and advocated for policy changes that would benefit working people throughout the region. A knock on Maya's office door interrupted her thoughts. David stood in the doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee and wearing the expression that had become familiar over the past 3 months. Part businessman, part grieving father, part hopeful human being who was learning to believe in the possibility of positive change again. "Thought you might need a refill," he said, setting 1 cup on her desk. It had become their morning ritual, these few minutes of quiet conversation before the day's meetings and phone calls began, a time to check in with each other and discuss both the practical and emotional aspects of their work together. "Thank you," Maya said, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic and inhaling the rich aroma. "How did the interview with Forbes magazine go yesterday?" "Better than I expected," David replied, settling into the chair across from her desk that had become his unofficial spot for their daily conversations. The reporter seemed genuinely interested in what we're trying to accomplish, not just looking for a feel-good story to fill space. She's planning to follow up with some of our scholarship recipients and interview them about how the Foundation has impacted their lives. Maya nodded, pleased but not surprised. Media attention had been unexpected but welcome, not for the recognition or publicity, but for the platform it provided to talk about the issues facing service workers and the possibility of creating more humane workplace policies throughout the industry. "There's something I wanted to discuss with you," David continued, his tone shifting to something more formal and businesslike. "I've been getting inquiries from other cities, other business owners who want to replicate what we've built here. Detroit, Milwaukee, Indianapolis, even some calls from the East and West Coasts, people who have heard about the Foundation and want to create similar programs in their communities." Maya set down her coffee cup, her mind immediately racing with possibilities and challenges. This was the kind of expansion she had been hoping for but hadn't dared to expect so soon. That's incredibly exciting, but it would require significant infrastructure development. We'd need regional coordinators, local partnerships, ways to ensure that our standards and values are maintained across different markets and cultural contexts. "Exactly," David said, leaning forward with the enthusiasm that always appeared when he talked about expanding their impact. "Which is why I'd like you to head up the national expansion. You'd be traveling extensively, working with business leaders and community organizations, essentially replicating what we've built here in cities across the country." The offer was flattering and exciting, representing the kind of professional opportunity Maya could never have imagined when she was struggling to make ends meet as a waitress at Danny's Diner. But it was also daunting, a responsibility that would affect thousands of people and require skills she wasn't sure she possessed. "That's a huge responsibility, David," she said honestly. "I'm not sure I'm ready for something that big. The Foundation here is still growing, still developing, and I want to make sure we have a solid model before we start expanding to other markets." David smiled, the expression transforming his face in the way that never failed to remind Maya of that day 3 months ago at the diner, when she had first seen glimpses of the man he could become beneath the weight of his grief and disappointment. "Maya, 3 months ago you risked your job to buy a stranger lunch because you believed it was the right thing to do. You didn't know he was a CEO, you didn't know it would lead to anything, you just acted from your heart and your principles. That's exactly the kind of person I want leading this expansion." Before Maya could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but something prompted her to answer. The same instinct that had led her to take Jennifer Walsh's call all those months ago. "Maya Rodriguez speaking." "Ms. Rodriguez, This is Dr. Sarah Martinez from Northwestern Memorial Hospital. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I got your number from the Emma Chen Foundation website, and I wanted to tell you about something that happened here yesterday. Maya's heart skipped a beat, wondering if there had been some kind of emergency or crisis involving one of their scholarship recipients. Is everything okay? Oh yes, everything's wonderful, Dr. Martinez assured her quickly. I'm calling because I wanted to tell you about one of our nurses, a young woman named Rebecca Thompson. She's been working in our emergency department for about 6 months now, and yesterday something happened that I think you'd want to know about. Maya waited, unsure where the story was heading, but sensing its importance from the doctor's tone. We had a homeless man come into our emergency room, clearly hadn't eaten in days, was dehydrated and exhausted, suffering from exposure and probably some underlying medical conditions that hadn't been treated. Our usual protocol would have been to treat his immediate medical needs and then discharge him with some basic information about local shelters. Dr. Martinez paused, and Maya could hear the smile in her voice when she continued. But Rebecca spent her entire lunch break calling around to find resources for this man, a shelter with an open bed, a job training program that might help him get back on his feet, a clinic that could provide ongoing medical care for his chronic conditions. She even used her own money to make sure he had bus fare and enough food for several days. Maya felt her eyes well up with tears, moved by the story of a young nurse she had never met who had chosen to go far beyond her job requirements to help someone in need. The thing is, Dr. Martinez continued, when I asked Rebecca why she had gone to such extraordinary lengths for this patient, she told me that she had read about your foundation in the newspaper, about the story of how you risked your job to help a customer at a restaurant. She said that if a waitress could sacrifice her livelihood to show kindness to a stranger, she could certainly make a few phone calls and spend some of her own money to help someone who needed it. Maya felt overwhelmed by the weight of unintended consequences, the ripple effects of that single decision in a corner booth at Danny's Diner. She thought about Rebecca Thompson, a nurse she had never met, who had been inspired to extraordinary compassion by reading about Maya's simple act of human decency. Rebecca wanted me to tell you, Dr. Martinez concluded, that your example is spreading, that people throughout the medical community are talking about what you and Mr. Chen have accomplished, and that it's inspiring healthcare workers to think differently about their responsibility to patients and to each other. After hanging up, Maya sat in her office feeling the full weight of how far the ripples had spread from that moment of choosing compassion over self-preservation. She thought about all the people who might be reading about the Foundation's work, who might be making small choices every day to treat others with greater kindness and respect because they had been inspired by a story about a waitress who stood up to a bully. Good news? David asked, noting her expression and the tears in her eyes. Maya told him about the phone call, about the nurse who had been inspired by their story to help a homeless man in ways that went far beyond her professional obligations. As she spoke, she saw David's eyes fill with tears, not the grief that had marked him for months after Emma's death, but something else. Pride, perhaps, or hope, or the deep satisfaction that came from knowing that his daughter's values were continuing to influence the world in ways both seen and unseen. Emma wanted to work in emergency medicine, he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. She used to say that the emergency room was where you could see humanity at its best and worst, sometimes in the same shift. She believed that healthcare workers had a special responsibility to see every patient as someone's child, someone's parent, someone worthy of dignity and respect, regardless of their circumstances. I think she would have been a lot like Rebecca Thompson, Maya said softly. I think so too, David agreed, wiping away tears that he no longer tried to hide, and I think she would be incredibly proud of what we're building in her memory. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, looking out at the city below where millions of people were making choices every day, some kind, some cruel, some indifferent. Each choice created ripples that spread in ways both seen and unseen, touching lives and changing outcomes in a vast network of human connection that extended far beyond any individual's ability to track or measure. David, Maya said finally, about the national expansion you mentioned. I've been thinking about it, and I want to accept that challenge. But I have some conditions. What kind of conditions? I want to start with a pilot program in just 3 cities: Detroit, Milwaukee, and maybe Nashville. I want to spend at least 6 months in each location, really understanding the local culture and economic conditions before we try to replicate our model. And I want to build a team of regional coordinators who understand service industry work from the ground up, people who have lived these challenges rather than just studied them. David's smile was brilliant, the expression of a man who had found not just an employee, but a true partner in building something meaningful and lasting. Those aren't conditions, Maya. Those are exactly the right approach. Emma always said that lasting change happens one person at a time, one relationship at a time. You understand that in a way that gives me tremendous confidence in what we can accomplish together. Over the following weeks, Maya threw herself into planning the national expansion. With the same energy and dedication she had once brought to her marketing campaigns, but with a sense of purpose that felt entirely different. This wasn't about selling products or services. This was about spreading something essential, something that could genuinely improve people's lives and create positive change in communities across the country. She researched potential partner cities, identifying local business leaders who might be interested in creating more humane workplace policies. She developed training materials that could be adapted to different regional needs while maintaining the foundation's core values. She created evaluation metrics that would ensure quality and effectiveness across multiple locations. Most importantly, she began building relationships with people who shared their vision. Restaurant owners who wanted to create better working conditions for their employees, community leaders who understood the struggles facing service workers in their areas, social workers and advocates who had been fighting these battles long before the Emma Chen Foundation existed and could provide invaluable guidance about local needs and challenges. Each conversation reinforced Maya's belief that they were part of something larger than any individual organization or initiative. There was a hunger out there for a different way of doing business, a different way of treating people, a different definition of success that included human dignity alongside financial profit. The challenge was connecting all these scattered efforts into something coherent and sustainable. 6 months after that transformative day at Danny's Diner, Maya found herself on a plane to Detroit, heading to her first expansion meeting with Margaret Davidson, who owned a small chain of family restaurants in the Detroit area and had reached out about creating a branch of the Emma Chen Foundation. As the city of Chicago fell away beneath her, Maya thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been unemployed and struggling, sending out resumes to companies that never responded, wondering if she would ever find meaningful work again. 8 months ago, she had been serving coffee to people who treated her as if she were invisible, counting tips to make rent, questioning whether her expensive education had been worth the debt she had accumulated. Now she was traveling across the country to help build a national network of foundations dedicated to supporting and empowering service workers. She had a salary that allowed her to live comfortably, meaningful work that aligned with her values, and the deep satisfaction that came from knowing her daily efforts were making a genuine difference in people's lives. But perhaps most importantly, she had found her purpose. Not just a job or even a career, but a calling that connected her to something larger than herself. She was part of Emma Chen's legacy, part of David's healing process, part of a movement that believed individual kindness could create systemic change. The plane touched down in Detroit on a crisp, winter afternoon that reminded Maya of that fateful day at the diner. As she walked through the airport, she thought about all the service workers she passed, the security guards checking IDs with professional courtesy, the cleaning staff maintaining the complex with quiet efficiency, the restaurant employees serving travelers who might be stressed or hurried or simply indifferent to the humanity of the people helping them. Each worker had a story, dreams, struggles, moments of kindness and cruelty that shaped their days and determined their willingness to extend themselves for others. Each one deserved to work in an environment that valued their humanity alongside their productivity, that recognized their worth as human beings rather than just treating them as replaceable components in a vast service machine. Maya's first meeting was with Margaret Davidson at one of her restaurants, a place that reminded her of Danny's diner, but felt completely different. Warm where Danny's had been harsh, welcoming where the other had been merely utilitarian. The servers moved with confidence and genuine smiles. The customers seemed relaxed and happy, and there was an energy in the air that spoke of mutual respect between workers and management. "I've been running restaurants for 25 years, Margaret explained, as they sat in a booth that could have been the same corner booth where Maya's life had changed forever. "I started as a server myself, worked my way up through every position in the business, and I've never forgotten what it feels like to depend on tips to pay rent, to have your livelihood determined by the moods and whims of strangers." Maya nodded, understanding completely the perspective that came from having lived these challenges rather than just observing them from a distance. "When I read about what you and Mr. Chen have accomplished in Chicago," Margaret continued, "I knew I wanted to be part of something like that. My employees are good people, hard-working, honest, caring, but they're one emergency away from financial disaster, one cruel customer away from a ruined day, one unfair manager away from losing their livelihood." Over the next 3 hours, Maya and Margaret developed the framework for what would become the Detroit branch of the Emma Chen Foundation. They talked about funding mechanisms that would ensure sustainability without depending entirely on corporate charity. They discussed application processes that would identify people who truly needed help while avoiding bureaucratic obstacles that might prevent the most vulnerable from accessing assistance. They planned partnerships with local organizations that already understood the community's needs and could help ensure that the Foundation's resources were used effectively. As Maya prepared to leave for her hotel that evening, Margaret walked her to the door and said something that would stay with her for the rest of her life. "You know what struck me most about your story when I first read it? It wasn't that you helped a stranger. Lots of people would do that if they could afford it. It was that you helped him even when you couldn't afford it, even when it cost you everything you had to lose. That's the kind of courage that changes the world, one person at a time." Flying back to Chicago the next day, Maya looked down at the lights of the cities passing below and thought about all the lives being lived in those glowing clusters. People working late shifts to support their families, individuals struggling to make ends meet while maintaining their dignity, workers choosing every day between self-interest and compassion in small interactions that might seem insignificant, but actually determined the moral character of their communities. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "How did the Detroit meetings go?" Maya typed back, "Perfect, Margaret. Is going to be an incredible partner. Detroit launch is definitely going to happen." But as she settled back in her seat for the remainder of the flight, Maya realized that Detroit was just the beginning. There were dozens of other cities, hundreds of potential partners, thousands of service workers who could benefit from the programs they were building. More than that, there were millions of people who could be inspired by the simple message that kindness mattered, that treating others with dignity was not just morally right, but practically effective, that building a more compassionate world was not just a dream, but an achievable goal. 2 years after that transformative day at Danny's Diner, Maya stood on the stage of the Chicago Hilton Ballroom, looking out at an audience of over 1,000 people who had gathered for the second annual Emma Chen Foundation Gala. The event had grown far beyond their expectations, drawing attendees from across the Midwest and generating national media attention for the Foundation's work. Restaurant owners and service workers sat side by side at tables decorated with photographs of scholarship recipients and program beneficiaries. Corporate executives shared conversations with community activists, their usual boundaries dissolved by shared commitment to the Foundation's mission. Former scholarship recipients mingled with Foundation donors, their stories of transformation creating connections that transcended traditional social and economic divisions. David introduced her with words that still made her emotional every time she heard them. 2 years ago, Maya Rodriguez was a waitress who risked her job to help a stranger. Tonight, she's the Director of National Operations for a foundation that has changed thousands of lives across 12 cities, with expansion plans that will reach every major metropolitan area in the country within 5 years. As Maya stepped up to the podium, she looked out at the sea of faces and thought about how far they had all come. The foundation now operated in 12 cities across the Midwest and South, with pilot programs launching on both coasts within the next 6 months. They had provided over 800 scholarships, distributed more than $5 million in emergency assistance, and helped create workplace policies that protected service workers in over 2,000 establishments. But beyond the impressive statistics, beyond the programs and policies and organizational charts, what Maya was most proud of were the individual stories. The single mothers who were now able to attend college while working full-time, the older workers who had found new careers after being displaced by economic changes, the young people who no longer had to choose between education and survival because the foundation had given them a path to both. 2 years ago, Maya began, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom sound system. I learned something that changed my life forever. I learned that when you choose to see another person's humanity, when you act with kindness, even when it costs you something significant, you create ripples that spread far beyond anything you could imagine or measure. She paused, looking for David in the audience. He was sitting at a table near the front, and beside him was an empty chair with a single white rose. Emma's place at every foundation event, a reminder that her influence continued to grow even after death. Tonight, I want to tell you about some of those ripples, Maya continued. And for the next 30 minutes, she shared stories of transformation and hope, of kindness multiplied and compassion rewarded, of a vision that had started with one young woman's belief in the power of human goodness and had grown into a movement that was changing how entire industries thought about their responsibility to workers and communities. She talked about Rebecca Thompson, the nurse who had been inspired to extraordinary compassion by reading about Maya's story. She shared updates on scholarship recipients who were now graduating from nursing school and teaching programs, who were becoming social workers and counselors and advocates for others facing similar struggles. She described partnerships with major corporations that were implementing new policies to support and protect service workers. When she finished speaking, the audience rose in a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. But what moved Maya most was not the applause. It was the faces in the crowd, the expressions of people who had been reminded that their daily choices mattered, that small acts of kindness could indeed change the world in ways that extended far beyond their immediate circumstances. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and guests began to leave, Maya found herself in the hotel lobby with David, both of them exhausted but exhilarated by the evening's success and the connections that had been made between people who shared their commitment to creating positive change. Emma would have loved tonight, David said, and Maya heard in his voice something that had grown stronger over the past 2 years. Not just grief for what was lost, but genuine joy for what had been built in his daughter's memory, pride in the legacy they had created together. She would have, Maya agreed. And I think she would have been amazed by how far her influence has spread, how many people have been inspired to greater kindness because of the values she lived by. David smiled, the expression that had become more frequent as the months passed, and his work with the foundation had given him a way to channel his grief into something positive and productive. You know what I think about sometimes? That morning at the diner, when I was sitting in that booth feeling sorry for myself and wondering if anything mattered anymore, if Emma's death had any meaning, or if the world was just randomly cruel. If you hadn't chosen to help me, if you had just ignored what Frank was doing or looked the other way to protect your own job, where would we all be now? Maya considered this, thinking about the butterfly effect of human kindness, the way a single moment of compassion could redirect the course of multiple lives and create changes that rippled through time in ways that were impossible to predict or measure. I think about that too, she admitted. But then I remember what my grandmother used to tell me, that when you do the right thing, the universe finds a way to make everything else work out. Maybe it wouldn't have been that day in that diner, but somehow, somewhere, your grief would have found a way to become something beautiful and meaningful. Maybe, David said, but I'm grateful it happened the way it did. I'm grateful that Emma's last lesson to me came through someone who embodies everything she believed about human goodness, someone who understands that individual choices really do matter. As Maya finally made her way home that night, riding through the quiet streets of Chicago in a taxi that carried her past Danny's diner, now bearing a small plaque that read, "Birthplace of the Emma Chen Foundation," she thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. She was no longer the struggling waitress who had made a desperate choice to help a stranger. She was no longer the unemployed marketing professional who had wondered if her education and experience would ever amount to anything meaningful. She had become something she never could have imagined, a leader in a movement that was changing how society viewed and treated its most vulnerable workers, someone whose daily work contributed to a legacy of compassion that would outlive them all. But at her core, she was still the same person who had knelt down to help a sad man gather his scattered belongings, who had chosen kindness over self-preservation, who had believed that everyone deserved dignity regardless of their circumstances. The difference was that now she had the resources, the platform, and the organization to act on those beliefs at a scale she never could have imagined possible. Every policy she developed, every program she implemented, every speech she gave was an extension of that single moment in the corner booth when she had chosen to see David Chen's humanity and respond with compassion. The ripples from that choice continued to spread, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen, creating positive changes that would continue long after she was gone. 5 years after that transformative day at Danny's diner, Maya stood in the Rose Garden of the White House, part of a delegation invited to discuss federal policies affecting service workers. As she listened to senators and cabinet members debate minimum wage legislation and healthcare benefits, she thought about how far the conversation had come from that autumn day when she had been just another invisible waitress in a struggling diner. The Emma Chen Foundation had become a national model, with branches in 50 cities and partnerships with major corporations committed to creating more humane workplace policies. Maya's work had been featured in Harvard Business Review, Time magazine, and the New York Times. She had been invited to speak at conferences and universities across the country, sharing the story of how one act of kindness had created a movement that was transforming entire industries. But what she was most proud of were the thousands of letters that arrived at the Foundation's offices every week, from scholarship recipients who were now graduating from nursing schools and teaching programs, from workers who had been empowered to stand up for themselves and their colleagues, from managers who had learned to lead with compassion rather than fear, from customers who had been inspired to treat service workers with greater respect and appreciation. Each letter was a reminder that the ripples continued to spread, that Emma Chen's belief in the power of individual kindness was being proven true every day in countless small interactions across the country. The foundation had become something larger than any single organization. It was a symbol of the possibility that ordinary people making extraordinary choices could indeed change the world, one act of compassion at a time. That evening, Maya called David from her hotel room in Washington to update him on the White House meetings and the federal policies they were advocating for implementation nationwide. "How did the meetings go?" he asked, his voice carrying the enthusiasm that always appeared when they discussed expanding their impact to reach more people. "Incredible," Maya replied. "They're actually considering several of our policy recommendations for federal implementation. Can you imagine programs based on Emma's values being implemented nationwide, affecting millions of service workers across the entire country?" "She would be over the moon," David said, and Maya could hear the smile in his voice, could picture him sitting in his office with Emma's photograph on his desk, still talking to his daughter about the work they were doing in her memory. "You know what I realized today? It's been exactly 5 years since that morning at the diner." "I know, I was thinking about that too during the Senate subcommittee hearing. I've been thinking about Emma more lately, but differently than before," David continued, his voice growing softer and more reflective. "Instead of just missing her and grieving what was lost, I've been feeling grateful for the time we had together, proud of the person she became, amazed by how her influence continues to grow, even after she's gone." Maya felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to this man she had come to love like family talk about his journey from paralyzing grief to purposeful action. "That's beautiful, David. And it's because of the work we've done together. Because you found a way to keep her alive in the world through the foundation. It's because of you, Maya, David replied, his voice thick with emotion. Because you helped me find a way to turn grief into something positive, to make sure Emma's beliefs and values continue to touch people's lives in ways that matter. You gave me a reason to keep going when I thought my life was over. After they hung up, Maya sat by her hotel window, looking out at the lights of the nation's capital, thinking about all the lives being lived in the surrounding area, people working late shifts in restaurants and hospitals and cleaning services, people making choices every day about how to treat each other, people who might never know that their smallest acts of kindness could create changes that rippled across years and geography and social boundaries. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, now head nurse in Northwestern Memorial's cardiac unit. Saw you on the news tonight talking to the president. Still can't believe my old roommate is changing the world. Emma would be so proud. Maya smiled and typed back, "We're all changing the world, one choice at a time. See you when I get back to Chicago." And as she prepared for bed in a hotel room hundreds of miles from that corner booth where everything had started, Maya knew with complete certainty that this was true. Every person who chose kindness over indifference, every manager who treated employees with dignity, every customer who showed respect to service workers was part of a vast network of positive change that extended far beyond any single foundation or organization. The story that had begun with a fired waitress helping a struggling customer had become something much larger, a reminder that in a world often dominated by cruelty and indifference, individual acts of compassion still had the power to transform lives, communities, and entire systems. Maya Rodriguez had discovered the most important truth of all, that when you treat others with the dignity and respect that every human being deserves, the universe has a way of ensuring that kindness comes back to you, multiplied beyond your wildest dreams. And sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the simplest decisions: to help a stranger, to stand up for what's right, to believe that everyone, regardless of their circumstances, deserves to be treated with basic human decency. In honoring Emma Chen's memory, in building a foundation that supported service workers across the country, in creating ripples of kindness that spread far beyond anything they could track or measure, Maya and David had proven that love truly was stronger than loss, that hope could emerge from the depths of grief, and that ordinary people making extraordinary choices could indeed change the world, one act of compassion at a time. The young woman who had once served coffee to make ends meet was now changing an entire industry, one policy at a time, one training program at a time, one act of kindness at a time. And somewhere in the great mystery of existence, Emma Chen continued to touch the world through every person who chose. Compassion over indifference. Every moment someone decided that human dignity was worth defending. Every time someone proved that love was stronger than fear. Maya Rodriguez had found her purpose in the most unlikely place, a dingy diner booth where she had chosen to see a struggling customer as a human being worthy of help. That choice had cost her a job, but given her a calling, had ended one chapter of her life, but begun a much more meaningful one, had proven once and for all that the smallest acts of kindness could indeed change the world in ways beyond imagination. In the end, that was Emma Chen's greatest legacy, not just the foundation that bore her name, but the understanding that individual choices mattered, that treating people with dignity and respect wasn't just nice but necessary, that building a more compassionate world was not just a dream, but an achievable goal that required nothing more than ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary in small moments that could transform everything.